All right, there we go. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Nicole Lyons. I'm from the Jorgensen Learning Center, and I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Julie B. Wise. We are both so grateful that you decided to join us today, take a little bit of your most valuable resource, your time, to spend with us as we take you through a conversation that we're really excited about today. We are both part of the Jorgensen Learning Center. If you don't know us yet, we're so glad you're here. And we are a team of learning professionals and leadership communications coaches that are committed to supporting leaders to enhance the quality of their everyday leadership conversations, relationships, and results. Today, we're using the Zoom webinar platform, as you all noticed as you joined this meeting. But there are some key ways that you can engage with us during the conversation today. And you'll find those in that toolbar at the bottom of your screen. One way is going to be that Q&A feature. So feel free at any time during the conversation to go ahead and pop a question in and we'll get to it. We'll answer it live during the conversation today. There's also the chat feature. And you can use the chat feature to send us messages as the presenters. There's a little drop-down menu. You can choose whether you want your message to go to us or whether you want your message to go to the entire attendee list. And we encourage that. We love to see your comments. We love to see the engagement back and forth in those chat comments. So please feel free to use both the Q&A and the chat to engage with us throughout the conversation today. And there will be times that we'll invite you to chat in and to give your thoughts. And we love that because we're all about having conversations. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and lead into our topic. Today, we're going to be talking about feedback for the win and how important and essential feedback is to a learning organization. So when I was thinking about this meeting and feedback and how we often get or receive feedback, I was thinking about times when I've gotten maybe that dreaded text message that says, we need to talk, or an email from your boss that says, hey, we need to chat, or email that says, I've got some feedback for you. And immediately I start to have like this emotional reaction, right? I feel nervous. I wonder what I did wrong. I wonder what they're going to say. And that is often how we react and respond to getting feedback. But as I mentioned, it's really essential part of a learning organization. I think in our rational brains, we can know that feedback serves as a catalyst for learning and improving ourselves. And even studies show that 65% of employees desire more feedback than they're currently receiving. We don't always react that way in our lizard brain when we know feedback is coming, but that is really what people desire. So building a healthy feedback culture within your organization is absolutely critical to the long-term sustainability, your ability to be agile, to be creative, to be innovative within your organization. All depends on your ability to receive and to encourage an environment of feedback, but not so easy in practice. So that's why we really wanted to share with you some ways in which you can approach feedback maybe differently than you have before, ways in which you can start to integrate those feedback loops into your everyday leadership conversations. So we're going to share 4 kinds of feedback: receiving, influencing, collaborating, and leading, all through feedback during the conversation today. So at the end of this conversation, you're going to have at least one way that you can enhance your response or delivery of feedback. So Julie, what did you hear me saying? What do you have to add for our agenda today?
So I hear today we're talking about feedback, and specifically we're going to share 4 different ways to interact with feedback and to have a collaborative conversation, so that it's not just one person giving feedback and one person receiving feedback, but how can we come together and both be a part of the feedback? And anytime we say the word feedback, we get sweaty. And Dan responded back to all of us, and he said, yes, we know that feeling, right? And all of a sudden you're like stressed out, or if you have to say something to somebody and you're really losing sleep because you're not sure how you want to say it, because you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. So I hear that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, thank you so much for sharing that. And that just reminded me, as you said, I used to work with an organization who had this culture of nice. And everyone was very nice, but that led to a lot of challenges when it came to actually giving honest feedback. So I'm excited for where this conversation is going to go today, and I will let you kick it off.
Sure. So I'm going to start with the number one. And if you, Nicole, would be willing to type it in the chat so people who are taking notes can see it. So the number one is receiving feedback. So let me define feedback first. So feedback is anytime you get information about yourself. And feedback is, in essence, how we learn about ourselves from others or an experience that we're having. Interestingly and unfortunately, the research suggests that a lot of the feedback actually doesn't have any impact on improving performance, because we've focused all of our training on leaders on how to give the feedback. And what they're finding in their 2014 book, it was called Thanks for the Feedback. So it's a little dated, but it still was really fitting. It's by Stone and Heen, H-E-E-N, and they found that it's actually the receiver who is key in determining the success of whether or not the feedback is effective or not. So I'm going to invite everybody to join in the chat, and I want you to think about a time when you responded to feedback in maybe a less ideal way. Can you think about why you reacted that way? So you can either type in a time when you responded, you sort of had a freak out, or you snapped at somebody and it wasn't the way that you wished you responded, or maybe you could type in why you reacted that way. And while you're typing, I'm going to share a story, and Nicole, you can type in yours as well and invite others, because I know it takes time for people to think. But I can remember this time I was at a Navy command, and this person asked me, it wasn't really even necessarily feedback, it was like a question, but it was the way that she had asked it. And she was like, well, why should we believe you anyway? Because you're not military. And I was just like, I was hurt by it. I was already nervous. I didn't feel like I belonged because I wasn't in the military, and I sort of agreed with her, and it just sort of like put me on pause. And I just said, well, you're right. I don't think you should believe me, but we can talk about it and engage in it. It just wasn't very smooth the way that I wanted to do it. And according to the authors, they actually say that there's 3 reasons why feedback can go sideways. First of all, it's the content of what was said was unexpected. And that is true in my case. I was not expecting her to challenge me as to why she should believe me or not. Usually the Navy is very open and they love to learn, and regardless of, your status, but that was definitely unexpected. And then the second one is the relationship with the person who's giving the feedback. So sometimes you can hear it from some people. I can hear feedback from people at my work, but I may not be able to hear feedback from my husband or my kids. It might, have a different experience there. And then the third way that feedback can go sideways is how that feedback aligns with your identity. So it didn't align with my identity because I was already feeling on edge about not being an insider. And so the fact that she said that sort of, again, made, so 2 out of the 3, definitely. So Nicole, I know that some people are chatting. Are there any comments that you want to share with others?
Yeah, some really great comments coming in. Some examples of feedback that didn't go well was they didn't feel like the feedback was really provided to enhance their growth, felt it was more of an attack, or it was more personal. I took it personal when it wasn't personal at all. And it's so interesting to hear like the ways in which we receive or perceive feedback is coming at us, whether we take it as personal feedback, like an emotional attack, or is it really about the idea? Is it really about the thinking? And that's probably a longer conversation for another day, but we often assume that it's personal. We take it in a very personal way. The feedback was offensive because of the way it was delivered. Management by objective, all about what you did incorrectly and unable to find anything you did well. When the feedback was delivered by someone whose motives I didn't trust, I responded with one available weapon: sarcasm. Oh, that's interesting. Sarcasm has such an interesting impact on environments. A defensive response intended to maintain the barrier between me and the feedback provider.
So all of us can come up with examples of how we were receivers and we did not receive it well. And as you leave here today, that's the first tip, to start to have conversations with those that you interact with and ask them that question. Was there a time that you had feedback that you didn't respond the way that you had hoped, or in a less, professional manner? And start to just have a conversation about what it's like to provide and to receive feedback. And that will definitely start to create that safe space for everyone to realize that feedback is complex, and that, it's really important to set up that safe space.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Nicole, how are you feeling about this idea that it's actually the receiver, not the giver, that determines whether or not the feedback is successful?
Yeah, I think that comes back to one of the fundamentals, and that's the first person that you lead is yourself. I think in any situation, we have a choice about how we respond. And that's really all we have control over. And I think that's especially important when we consider feedback. So I can choose to be defensive. I can choose to say, well, that person's kind of an idiot, so why would I listen to anything that they have to tell me? Or I can choose to say, what can I learn? What can I learn from this interaction? What can I learn from this experience? What do I have to learn from this person? And use that as a mechanism for our own personal growth. And I think it's really all about that personal choice of how we want to go about our daily lives. One of the things that it reminds me of as well is a quote from Sheryl Sandberg. She's the chief operating officer of Facebook. And she was asked what is something that they look for in someone who can scale with the organization. And her response was someone who takes feedback well. Because people who can take feedback well are people who can learn and grow quickly. And isn't that who we all want to be? People who can learn and grow quickly?
Yeah, definitely. That's great. So, and then Dan, of course, said that, it's all about personal choice. That's key. And just having an awareness around it. So you want to help us understand a little bit more about the second part of influencing through Facebook, or I'm still thinking about Facebook from your earlier quote.
That is a big conversation that we won't be tackling about.
No, definitely
through Facebook. But yes, would love to talk about influencing through feedback. So receiving feedback, obviously, we just talked about being the receiver of feedback and how important that is. But that's even more important as you move through the ranks of leadership. So receiving feedback is one of the key ways that leaders and organizations make decisions, identify issues and challenges, understand what's really happening within an organization. The challenge is, however, that the higher up in leadership you go, the more likely you are to surround yourself with people who think exactly like you. That is what the research and the data and the experience shows, is the higher up you get, you will surround yourself with people who think similarly and react similarly and are more likely to say yes to you versus challenge you. So you have to be very intentional, as a senior leader, to get the feedback that you desire. And you have to create an environment where people feel safe enough to share what they're really thinking through all levels of an organization. I worked for an organization where we had a name or a term for when somebody challenged or spoke up and questioned leadership out of turn. And we called it a career limiting move. We even sometimes shortened it to a CLM. And it was known that if in the wrong place you spoke up and questioned somebody, that you would be perceived as oppositional or someone who wasn't on board, and you would not say a thing for fear of doing a CLM or a career limiting move. And that environment suffered because of it. The leaders in all levels of that organization didn't receive the information that they needed to make the best decisions and to move forward. So for you as leaders, the things that you can do to start creating that environment where people feel comfortable is ultimately leading by example. But I would really start to think about who talks in your meetings, who's speaking up in those conversations. What are they saying in those conversations that's helpful? I would think about the last time that you made a mistake. What happened? Did you tell people? Did you talk about it? And what happened the last time someone else in the organization made a mistake? Were they chastised? Were they encouraged? What was that experience like for somebody who made a mistake within the organization? I would think about how feedback loops are built into your systems. How do you end your meetings? How do you talk to people in meetings? Do you encourage them to ask questions throughout a conversation? And do you acknowledge and respond respectfully when someone shares their thinking? Or do you dismiss them and move on to the next person if it isn't exactly what you want to talk about in that moment or what you wanted to hear? And then I would really be encourage you all to think about, are you promoting collective or individual success within the organization? So Julie, based on some of those questions, what are some things that are coming to mind for you? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really important is, and this was something that was in the chat box, is how do we create this space? And I think you're exactly right. Those questions could be used as a check-in in the very beginning of a meeting with the group or one-on-one, or even by yourself, that you start to reflect on it. And I think that the more awareness you have of your tendency to respond to feedback and letting other people know, I will tell those that I work with, they know I'm an oppositional learner. Like when you give me feedback, my instant tendency is to say, you don't know me. I disagree with that. You don't know the whole story. Blah, 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 blah. And that's the way but they're not going to, be offended by the way I react, because I have already told them, I know that when somebody gives me feedback that I disagree with, that's the way I'm going to react. And then I just need a little bit of time, and then I can settle into it and I can repeat back, okay, so you're saying that when I'm late to meetings, it's impacting everybody else. Is that right? And then we can move on from there. But I think it's really important to ask those questions that you asked, and then start to discover how you can create a safe space, not only for yourself to react the way you need to, but then how to have a conversation after the feedback is delivered.
Yeah, people are going to really pay attention to how you model it. They're going to notice what you do when somebody gives you feedback, how you react in that moment. And I love what you said, Julie, about just being transparent about, hey, this is how I react to things. Don't take it personally, because I'm just going to go through my own process. I'm going to get there eventually. And so that level of awareness and commitment to really learning from other people, I think, is going to be key. Some comments coming in here. I remember working in improv, a training workshop. When you'd make a mistake, it was expected that others would cheer and applaud as a group. It was an amazing feeling to have our mistakes celebrated. Imagine that in a high pressure work setting. Yeah, that's a really wonderful example. I read a book recently, again, example from Facebook. They actually encourage people to test things and make mistakes. Some intern had made a mistake and it took down Facebook for not as long as it was out the other day, but for like 30 minutes or something. And they actually named a process after him, like a testing process. They encouraged it. They thanked him for discovering whatever he discovered about how their system works. So I think that there's something really key there about celebrating the attempt, recognizing people for the job that they did. And actually that leads us right into our next conversation around collaborating through feedback. So our next kind of tip is around how to collaborate using feedback. And I'll just share a quick story. Last weekend, I went to one of my son's soccer games, and actually that's where you'll find me pretty much any weekend, fall through fall again, all the seasons. You usually find me at the soccer field, but it was very interesting. My husband pointed out the dynamics between the two teams this weekend. And one of the teams was constantly chipping at each other. So when somebody would make a play, there was immediate criticism. What are you doing? Why would you do that? Next time score. Like other really unhelpful comments back and forth between the players on that team. The other team, however, was constantly focusing on what people did well. They were encouraging each other, that even if they didn't turn out how they wanted to, they were saying, good pass, nice try, good idea. Like their comments back and forth to each other were really collaborative. You got this kind of conversations. So who do you think took more chances? or possessed the ball more effectively? Who do you think won the game?
Mhm.
I'm going to tell you, it is that team that talked to each other and encouraged each other and collaborated with each other and built on what went well and gave each other feedback in a way that was received and encouraging them to do more. And I can't imagine what the two teams, well, I can't imagine because I heard about some of it from one of the players, but the blame that occurred on that other team after the game did not leave any of those players feeling like they wanted to come back and play again or work together. And I think that one of the key things there is about being mutually invested in each other's success. So any work or team environment, I think that is going to be essential. Are people pitted against each other, or are they really mutually invested in each other's success? And are they able to help each other to avoid things like the drama triangle, where everyone is, you're putting someone in some kind of a role, either the victim, the villain, or the rescuer role in every situation? Or are you able to see that that's occurring and come back to a space of collaboration or help people move through those challenging times in a way that might be way more effective? So we as peers to each other can drive that culture of feedback that we want. So you can try doing some really simple practices like ending your meetings with ways to reflect. So we can end those meetings or conversations or projects with questions like, what were our intentions? What did we actually do? What went well? What did we learn? And what will we do differently next time? I keep thinking back to that soccer team. My son's soccer team was the team who was chipping at each other. And I will tell you, if they had come together as a group and maybe had a debrief like this versus what occurred, where they were blaming each other, they may be in a better position for this coming weekend's game. And this kind of reflective conversation and feedback loop built into your work environment can help you transition maybe from an environment where there's a little hesitation or less collaboration to really inviting people to focus and talk about what went well and what did you learn, probably the most important question there. And then how might you go about it differently tomorrow or in the next project or the next cycle of work that you're heading towards. So one other tip, I know we're getting ready to move on to our next conversation, but in a collaborative work environment, you're really encouraged to find people to be those oppositional learners for you. I'm reading a book right now called Think Again, and it's all about challenging what you think you know. And feedback is a huge part of that. And they talk about establishing a challenge network. So that's the other key thing that you might think about as a leader is, who might your challenge network be? A group of people that you trust to point out the things that you may not be seeing, to help you to overcome any of your weaknesses, to help you rethink, question, challenge your own knowledge, and be curious about new perspectives. So who might those people be within your organization? And how might you encourage others within the organization to leverage their own challenge networks as a constant feedback loop in your system? So Julie, based on all that I just shared, what are some of the things that you're noticing?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you said clearly is we need to notice what our feedback is. And there's room for specific, honest feedback, but there's also room for the appreciation and the cheering on, and so that people are willing to take risks. And we have a great question, and I'm gonna ask it, and then I'm gonna ask everybody who's on the webinar to add into the chat feature, because we learn from you just as much, if not more, than from some of the research. And we have a question, and it says, I'm wondering how you can get these kinds of feedback loops built into an environment where you're not the boss and the boss is stereotypically lukewarm on the whole feedback thing. So has anyone had success, if you have, to change the culture of feedback in your environment. And if you'd be willing to type that in, something that you did that worked. And I will share something, and then Nicole, if you have something. So I think number one, it's all in modeling, and start small. Who are your immediate circles? You may not be the boss, but how can you set up feedback loops within? And oftentimes we do what's called a check-in and a check-out. So if you can have some type of 5-minute huddle in the morning to check in with what's happening, and then you end it with what everyone's agreeing to do. And then the next day or the next week, you have a list of things that people were, willing to check out, or, whatever, so that the next week you have this accountability of feedback check-ins. So the check-in is, okay, last week we got together, we created, 5 ideas that I asked you to take back to your department. What did your department say? So you're constantly at the beginning of every meeting that you have, you do a check-in with whatever was previously. And so that way that can help build those feedback loops. That's one. I'm going to give you one more. And then Nicole, I'm going to ask you to share some, if there's any coming in on the chat. Another one is when you put information out in your meeting, if you hold huddles, when I go to companies, I usually like to stay for the entire week. So in the beginning, they'll have their their board meeting on Monday, let's say, and there'll be certain things that were supposed to be passed to department. And then I follow each department throughout the week to see how they report out the information. And then at the end of the week, they have their board meeting again to see how that information is fed back. So that would be another one where you would sort of go and attend each one of these meetings just as an experiment to see what is the information coming out and coming in, and are you getting that information? That will help you identify which departments you have to work a little bit more on making sure that they, feed back to you information that you wish that you would be receiving. Nicole?
Yeah, absolutely. Some really great comments coming in from the group. Invite group members to give feedback to you personally versus, so be that example no matter what position that you hold, even if the leader isn't asking for it. So model the expectation to improve and collaborate. Start using the check-in, the CPO, and checkout. If you want to learn more about that, you can definitely reach out to us. We're happy to share and have a complimentary coaching session where we can share a little bit more about any of those things. There's a lot of really wonderful tips coming in. The one that I have that I would add to this list and share is to start with those questions that promote the learning environment, because those can foster the environment for feedback, so it doesn't quite feel so scary. So start with those questions like, hey, before we move on from this topic, I would really love to hear what everyone feels like went well. And that's a little less scary than, hey, what feedback do we have on this whole process, or on this person, or this thing that we just did? And then the what did we learn question can be really powerful and helpful as well, because you can steer away from the like, what did we do wrong? And because no one really wants to hear that. But what did we learn is that key question that can help people to say, all right, well, if we were going to do this again, what might we do differently? Can lead right into those questions. So that's what I would say, is to start with those questions that are going to lead into the, leave out the word feedback. Start with, what did you learn and what might you do differently next time, I think would be my advice or guidance. But yeah, some really great comments coming in. Hopefully we can read through all this. It's important to respond appropriately in a constructive way. Providing contrary feedback in a skillful way helps immensely. In my experience, I've loved a sensitive and concise feedback when it's presented as contrary to the topic or issue. Very good. The manager performs their own independent review, and during the feedback session, we collaborate. So there's really a lot of wonderful tips coming in in response to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also see peer feedback is another good one as well. So we're going to go into the last idea, and the last idea is, how do we lead through feedback, which really is part of what we're really all talking about throughout this entire thing as well. And when we think about that, how can we get to a point where we look forward to feedback? So I'm going to ask that to everyone, and feel free to chat as I talk through a little bit of the research. How do you get to yourself to a point where you look forward to it? And for the research, there's, and I'm sure many of you have heard of her before, Carol Dweck. She's done some research on fixed mindsets and growth mindset. And the fixed mindset is that I'm good, I'm bad, there's nothing I can do to change who I am. And the growth mindset is that, there's always something to learn. Now, interestingly, we think that we're one or the other. And I heard her speak, and she actually said it's that we can be fixed in some things and growth mindset in the other, which goes back to my initial part of why we're able to receive feedback from some people and not receive feedback from the others. So if we instantly are thinking that we are fixed in this area, so I can't spell, could never spell, still can't spell. I have some sort of dyslexia phonetic thing in my brain. And so I feel like I'm a pretty fixed mindset for that. But really, have I really worked hard on certain words? Am I open to that? And so when somebody corrects me with my spelling, I instantly react because that's sort of like a fixed mindset. And then I'm like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to realize this is a word that I don't spell correctly. And now I can pay attention to it and learn it. So I sort of go back and forth with that. But the idea, first of all, when you are leading with the feedback, it's very, very important that you're modeling that you are having feedback. Maybe you received coaching. Maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you could share times when you received feedback recently. Share success stories that you're seeing other people are doing. I was following this leader around, and the leader was a mentor and a senior leader, and he would say that we need to fix that. That slide, we need to do this, that, and everything he said out of his mouth was important feedback, but there was nothing coming in to say, I can tell that you worked really hard on this PowerPoint, but that one slide needs to be fixed. So we want to sort of look at what we're doing. So number one, have some type of initial setup conversation. And when you're doing this conversation, you start to want to really open up and be general and say, describe the best leader that you ever worked with. What would they be able to know and do? What sort of successful characteristics would they display? And so you're starting to get an expectation of what they think would be a really important leader. And then you too could say, well, these are the people that I've worked with, that I've collaborated with, the teams that I've really enjoyed are like this. So we're not specific on person to person yet. We're sort of talking about the system and the organization. We could talk about what success looks like for you, or what support looks like for you. So interestingly, the research suggests that there's 3 different types of feedback. There's appreciative feedback, there's coaching feedback, and there's evaluative feedback. And depending on what you're expecting, that could send the feedback to go awry. So for example, if I'm traveling for the week and my husband has worked all week long to run the kids and the dogs and feed and blah, 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 and I come home and he's expecting an appreciative feedback for me to say, thank you so much for all you've done. But instead, I come in with some type of evaluative feedback to say, why aren't the dishes done? That's not going to go over very well, right? So by asking the person, that's sort of another question is, really what type of feedback are you looking for? What can I help you with? So that's the first sort of type of easy overarching conversation that you can have to lead into this feedback. The second thing is you want to, after you start to establish that safe space and you start to understand what each other is expecting in the feedback, you then have some type of conversation where you say, okay, we're going to sit down and if we were mutually invested in each other's success, what would this look like? And so for me working with JLC, there is an expectation that every time we have a webinar, we do a podcast, I go and I do a training somewhere, or I travel and I, collaborate with someone, it is always expected that I call them at the end of the day, one of my colleagues, it could be Ray, it could be Nicole, it could be Vince, it could be Joe, it could be Colleen, but I call someone and I walk through what I felt worked well, what I learned and what I do differently. And then they provide me feedback as well. So that expectation, and it's an everyday sort of conversation. If you wait to have feedback once a quarter or once a year, the feedback probably is going to be uncomfortable because you don't have that conversation and that relationship. And research suggests conversation is the relationship, and the conversation is the natural way we learn. So if you're not having conversations with people about things that are going well and not going well, we're not learning. And the final one is to do some sort of type of checkout. A lot of times we have the feedback and we say, do you have any questions? And the person's like, nope, I don't have any questions. Okay, well, do better. And I'm asking you to have sort of a different checkout with what are we going to agree to do differently as a result of this conversation. And don't just make it about the person you're giving feedback to, make it also about you. So now that you've given this feedback to this person, what could you do differently to support them in learning something or doing something different? Maybe you need to model, maybe you need to get them coaching. So keep in mind that the feedback is taking a responsibility as a leader for both sides, both the person who's receiving it and also the giver. And hopefully from that conversation, both of you will commit to doing something different. So Nicole, what's your feedback on how to lead through feedback?
Yeah, I love that. I love the proactive approach. I think those conversations that you have ahead of time saying, what do we define as success for each other? And then making feedback based on that conversation a part of the regular everyday conversation is huge. And I think, as Julie mentioned, feedback, we talked in the very beginning about how uncomfortable we get when we talk about feedback. But if feedback is different, like we know that after this call, we're going to do a review. We're going to have a conversation about how we did. How do we think we did? What do we think went well? What did we learn? What might we do differently the next time? And I have no nervousness or fear about having that conversation because I have built trust with those I'm going to have that conversation with. And I know that they have my best interest and the best interest of the organization at heart. And I think that is what you can do as a leader, is you can start to demonstrate your mutual investment in the success of those around you. And you can start by asking questions that are maybe a little bit uncomfortable at first, but will then become a part of how you operate and have conversations on a daily basis.
Thank you, Nicole. So I just want to review here the 4 ideas that we went over today. And the first one is receiving feedback. So start to have an awareness of what you notice and how you respond to feedback, and then start to share that with others so that they are aware of your tendency, and that can open up a safe space to start to talk about it. The second one is, how can we influence through feedback? So keep in mind, the research says that that feedback really doesn't change performance at all because we haven't been focusing on the receiver. So start really focusing in on the receiver and making sure that they understand what's been suggested, you're on the same page, and that the intention was to appreciate you, to be your coach, and to be evaluative at the same time. The third one is collaborating through feedback. Remember that it is a reciprocal process, and if we are both mutually invested in each other's success, we both have things that we need to learn from each other, things that we need to change so that the work environment and everything that we're working toward can be enhanced and get better. And the final one is leading through feedback. So you're going to do that through actually looking at the organization as a whole, finding ways of where we can start to put those feedback loops in place by having check-ins in the beginning of a meeting, a checkout at the end, and sort of modeling that of ways that you're getting feedback and the ways that you're trying to do things differently as well.
Yeah, thank you, Julie.
Yep. So I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask everyone else, what sort of surprised you of the 4 leading ideas that are out there in research when it comes to feedback? Please type some into the chat box. And Nicole, anything that surprised you today?
I really loved all of the examples we saw, the comments that came in, talking about their own feedback experiences. And some of them resonated. It wasn't surprising necessarily, but some of them just resonated like, oh yeah, I've been there. Oh, I've seen that and watched that happen. Just how common, I guess, all of our feedback experiences are. And the simple, not easy, but simple ways that we can ourselves drive feedback in our organizations is something I hope you all take away.
So someone said that one of the takeaways from today is focusing on measuring effectiveness of feedback in the organization from the perspective of the receiver and not measuring the giving of the feedback. Someone else said the receiver, not the provider, determines the success of the feedback, and disconnecting how we want.
I think that's Facebook.
Is that Facebook?
Yeah. So
a few organizations can do that well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And 65% of us want it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, feedback. Got it.
Feedback. Oh, see, we're still in the Facebook thing. That's one thing we're going to work on, feedback and Facebook, because I was like, Facebook. Okay. All right. So you want to close this out?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, we have an invitation for all of you, to connect with us. We would love to connect with each and every one of you on this call today. We always offer a collaborative coaching conversation, complimentary on our website, gojlc.com. You can find us there. I'll put some links in the chat as well. That will be helpful. And then the next invitation is something that we are super excited about. We want to invite you all to some additional content we have around feedback. We have an upcoming learning series. This is specifically for educational leaders around enhancing your learning environment through the art and practice of feedback. And we're starting that in November, and enrollment is open now. So if you are an educational leader or you know an educational leader, there is a link that we would love for you to share with them that has a little bit more information and a place where you can go ahead and register for that workshop. It is a virtual learning series. It takes place in the afternoons. There are 4 sessions plus a bonus session, which will be geared towards practical application and group live coaching for how you can be more effective in this feedback space. And then the other invitation is that we are looking to offer this to a broader leadership audience in the new year, so in 2022. So if you're interested in that, there's also a link that I just placed in the chat that you can sign up for a wait list. So if you're interested in that, you can be the first to know when enrollment opens for that session. There's going to be a limited amount of seats. So if you are interested, I would suggest going to that link, putting yourself on the wait list so that you can be one of the first to join us. We are going to get much deeper into the conversation that we had today about these 4 ways that you can be more effective at feedback. And we really look forward to connecting with you in those sessions. All right. And then as always, like I said, www.gojlc.com is the way that you can reach out to us and connect with us. You can find resources there. You can find access to our podcast, our webinar recordings. This one will be posted likely later today in that place. So we are so grateful to each and every one of you who joined us today. If you sign up, we're going to be sending you a follow-up and also access to the recording. So Julie, anything you'd want to share? Any comments came in?
If one other thing that we always share is that being a leader is sometimes it can be lonely, and you don't have a safe space to practice those feedback conversations. And so we offer a 30-minute free discovery call. No expectation at all. So if you are struggling with giving feedback, please fill out that link to meet with us for a discovery call, and we can role play. That's one of my favorite things, to role play the conversation, to try and explore different ways that the feedback could go, the person could respond, and then you're really prepared to go in for that feedback conversation. So know that that's here, and I'm so grateful for everyone who was willing to join us, and thank you for sharing your ideas and your experience as well.
All right, see you next month.